My name is Claire Simmons, and 3 days ago I buried my father, or so I thought. While I stood graveside in Asheville, choking on grief and disbelief, my mother, his widow, was sipping cocktails in Cancun with her soulmate. Now, I'm beginning to suspect my father's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a setup. And someone very close to me wants me to disappear too. Before I share what happened next, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, let's rewind to the day everything started to fall apart. You don't expect your mother to laugh when you tell her husband just died. But there I was, standing outside the brick chapel at Morningvale Cemetery in Asheville, North Carolina, rain drizzling, clouds sinking low, staring at the phone in my hand like it had grown fangs. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "Did you just say you're in Cancun?" "Correct," she said lightly. "Sunshine, tequila, and the love of my life. Don't be so grim, Claire. Life moves on, you should too." I gripped the phone so tight I felt the plastic creak. My father hadn't even been buried yet. His casket was still inside the hall, surrounded by weeping neighbors and stale funeral flowers. The storm outside hadn't broken yet, but I was already drenched from the rain, from shock, from betrayal. "Are you serious? Your husband just died." My voice cracked on the word husband. There was a pause. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd hear herself, but no. "Oh, darling," she said with a sigh, "we were more roommates than anything by the end. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. She was lounging oceanside, while I stood at the edge of our family's ruin, trying to hold it all together. I ended the call before my hand could betray me and throw the phone into the gravel. Inside the chapel, everything was dim and too quiet. My Aunt Lorraine dabbed at her eyes with a wrinkled tissue. A neighbor I didn't recognize pressed a lukewarm hand against mine. The pastor murmured something about legacy and love, but the words slid off my skin like rain. None of it felt real. My father, Richard Simmons, had always been the steady one. The man who taught me how to change a tire, the one who left funny notes in my lunchbox until high school made that too embarrassing. He'd been healthy, maybe a little overworked, but now dead of a sudden heart attack, they said. And my mother, Diane Simmons, off playing honeymoon with her so-called soulmate, a man I'd never even heard of until that phone call. As I turned to leave the chapel, the air outside had shifted. Thunder cracked above the hills. People started to scatter toward their cars, murmuring apologies and promises to check in. I lingered alone by the grave, watching as the casket lowered inch by inch into the ground. I felt empty. Not just grief, not just confusion, but that horrible, cold clarity you get when something just doesn't add up. Something was wrong. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Life moves on. Too fast, if you ask me. As I walked back to my rental car, heels sinking in the wet grass, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what really happened to my father, even if it broke me in the process. That night, back in my apartment in Charlotte, I couldn't sleep. You'd think exhaustion would knock me out cold. After all, grief is supposed to be draining. But instead, I just lay there in the silence, staring up at the ceiling fan. It spun too slowly, like it was thinking over every bad decision I'd ever made. The apartment felt off, not haunted exactly, just hollow. Like someone had scooped the inside out and left only the shape behind. Every noise, every floorboard creak, every groan of the plumbing seemed louder than it should be. I pulled my father's old flannel blanket tighter around my shoulders and grabbed my phone off the nightstand. A mistake. Scrolling through old pictures only made it worse. There he was, standing by the grill on my last birthday, flipping burgers like he didn't have a secret to die with. Him at the lake house in August, reading that tattered mystery novel he always reread. A selfie we took the day I bought my first car, his arm around my shoulder, proud. I hated how normal he looked in all of them. My thumb hovered over the call mom button, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? Why weren't you crying today? Who the hell is your soulmate, and how long have you been calling him that? No, I'd said enough at the funeral, and besides, she wasn't grieving. I was. I flipped to airplane mode, set the phone down, and rolled over. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed, not a notification buzz, an actual message buzz, but I just put it in airplane mode. Frowning, I turned it over, and the screen lit up with a text. One message, from a number I hadn't seen light up in days. Weeks, actually. My father's number. I stared at it, pulse spiking so fast it felt like I'd been shocked. I knew what it had to be. A scam, someone reusing the number. A cruel prank by a spammer. My brain scrambled for explanations. But then I saw the message. "Help me! Go to the cemetery, quickly." I dropped the phone. For a second, I thought maybe I was dreaming. I closed my eyes tight. Opened them again. Nope. Still there, same number, same message. My fingers were trembling as I picked the phone back up. I wanted to call someone, anyone. But who? The police. And say what that my dead father just texted me from beyond the grave. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it. Someone must have gotten a hold of his phone. That had to be it. But why send me that message? Why now? This can't be real, I whispered into the dark. But some part of me, some stubborn, twitching nerve in my chest told me it was. Not that my father was alive, necessarily, but that something real was happening. Something I wasn't meant to understand yet. I threw on jeans and a hoodie, not even bothering with makeup or brushing my hair. I slid my phone into my pocket and grabbed my car keys. Outside, the night air was bitter and still. My breath fogged in front of me as I got into my car. For a moment, I sat there, engine idling, hands shaking against the wheel. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I did believe in my instincts, and right now, they were screaming that I was stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. The road to Morningvale Cemetery was deserted. The streetlights felt dimmer than usual, and the mist curled like smoke across the windshield. The cemetery gates were still open, apparently no one locked up for the dead. I parked on the gravel shoulder and slipped inside through the gate, pulling my hood up against the cold. Moonlight cast long shadows over the headstones. The fog hung low, brushing against my ankles like fingers. Every rustle, every snapping twig made my skin crawl. I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew I was scared, and I didn't want to be the kind of woman who ran from fear anymore. I headed toward my father's grave, but before I got there, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was something on the ground, right at the base of his headstone, a white envelope. I knelt slowly, heart pounding, and picked it up. It was sealed with plain tape, no name, no markings, just a slight smear of dirt on one edge. I peeled it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Typed, not handwritten. "Claire, do not trust anyone, go to these coordinates. Alone, no phones, no cops, we're out of time." Below the message were GPS coordinates, that was it. I stared at the paper like it might rearrange into something more comforting. But it didn't. The wind picked up just then, rattling the trees behind me. I whirled around. "Who's there?" I called out, no answer. But something moved. A flash of shadow near the graves behind me, too fast to catch. A branch snapped. My stomach dropped. I didn't wait. I bolted back to the car, clutching the note like a lifeline. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I barely remembered the drive back to my apartment. One moment I was sprinting across gravestones like a fugitive. The next I was locking the door behind me, double-checking the deadbolt twice, maybe 3 times, before collapsing onto the couch, clutching the envelope like it might evaporate if I let go. What had just happened? A text from my dead father. A mysterious envelope at his grave. Someone watching me, just out of reach. And now these coordinates burned into my brain like a brand. I should have been calling the police. I should have been reporting someone for harassment, or at least telling a friend where I was. But I couldn't bring myself to do it, because I knew deep down in my marrow this wasn't random. This wasn't a prank, this was him. I opened my laptop and typed the coordinates into Google Maps. They led to a forested area just outside Asheville. No roads, no buildings listed. Just a blur of trees and a winding trail marked only by a narrow service path. No street names. No signs. Just nowhere. I sat back in my chair, breathing hard. My hand went to the small gold necklace I always wore. Dad gave it to me on my 16th birthday, right before Mom forgot I even had one. I had 2 choices. Ignore this and live with the guilt forever, or follow it and risk everything. What would he want me to do? "Claire Bear," he used to say, "if your gut's shouting, listen. It's the only voice that's never lied to you." And right now, my gut wasn't shouting, it was screaming. I changed into hiking boots, grabbed a flashlight, and turned off my phone completely. I wrapped the paper in plastic and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. If this was a trap, I wanted to see it coming. The sky had started to lighten as I reached the outskirts of the park. A violet hue spilled across the horizon as I parked just off a gravel turn-in and locked my car. I followed the GPS coordinates step by step, the cold air biting at my face, branches scraping my arms as I cut deeper into the woods. My breath puffed in front of me and every step crunched against dead leaves. 40 minutes in, I thought maybe I'd gone too far. Then I saw it. A cabin. Small, unassuming, tucked beneath tall pine trees like it had grown there. The windows were dark, but smoke curled faintly from a thin chimney. I stood still, half hidden by trees, adrenaline buzzing just beneath my skin. Was I insane? Was I about to walk into a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere? And then the door opened. And there he was, my knees buckled. "Dad," I whispered. He looked older, thinner, paler, but it was him. Richard Simmons, my father, the man I had buried, alive. He stepped out onto the porch slowly, like he wasn't sure I'd actually come. "They were going to destroy me, Claire," he said, voice raw. I stared, shaking my head as my mouth worked silently. "What, how?" He stepped closer, arms outstretched like a man approaching a deer. "It's me, baby. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I collapsed to my knees in the dirt. The tears came fast, sobbing, choking sobs that I hadn't let out since the day he died. He knelt in front of me, pulling me into a hug I'd thought I'd never feel again. His heart was pounding against my cheek. This wasn't a dream. My father was alive, and someone had wanted him dead. The inside of the cabin smelled like cedar, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. A single candle flickered on the wooden table near the window, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts with secrets. I followed my father in slowly, still unsure if I was walking or floating. My body felt numb. My mind, a chaotic storm of memories and questions and disbelief. He looked over his shoulder at me, like he couldn't quite believe I was there either. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his voice low, almost shy. I stood in the middle of the room and stared at him. "You faked your own death," he exhaled, nodding. "I had no choice." "You had me," I snapped, the edge in my voice surprising even myself. "You had your daughter, you had a funeral, a coffin, Dad." "I know," he said, holding up his hands. "I know how it looks, but Claire, if I hadn't disappeared, I'd be dead for real. Your mother, she wanted me gone." He sat down heavily on a bench by the table, the candlelight casting deep lines across his face. I'd never seen him look this tired or this scared. "She's been planning it for over a year," he said, rubbing his temples. "Your mother and Michael." I blinked. "Michael, you mean her coworker Michael?" He looked at me sharply. "Is that what she's calling him these days?" I sat down slowly across from him, my knees weak. The wooden bench creaked beneath me. "I don't understand." "She said you had a heart attack. We had doctors, a death certificate." "All fake," he muttered. "Bought and paid for by Michael's consulting firm. Forged signatures, falsified records, you name it. The night I died, I just found out about the offshore account they'd opened in my name. Millions gone from my accounts, funneled through shell companies. I confronted her, and within 48 hours I had a target on my back." I was shaking my head, tears building behind my eyes. "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I couldn't risk you getting pulled into it," he said, voice cracking. "They'd been watching my emails, monitoring calls. If I reached out, you'd be next. I barely escaped that night. But you let me bury you," I whispered. "You let me stand there thinking you were gone." His eyes softened, guilt etched into every wrinkle. "I watched from a distance, Claire. I saw you at the cemetery. That almost broke me. But if I came back too soon, they'd know I was still alive, and they'd come after you to punish me." The candle flame danced wildly as the wind pressed against the walls. "I needed time to gather proof," he continued, "to build a case. But then I saw what they did to your inheritance, how they emptied my accounts, and I knew it wasn't just about money. It was about erasing me, replacing me. Your mother wants a new life with Michael and the money they stole." I swallowed, bile rising. She sounded so, casual when I called her, like none of it mattered. He nodded. "She thinks she's won." We sat in silence for a while. I stared at the grain in the wood table, tracing it with my finger like it might explain how a mother could do something like this. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why contact me now?" "Because I can't do this alone anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's one last piece of evidence, a safe in the Raleigh house, behind the false wall in my study. It holds the originals, documents, passcodes, account transfers, everything. I stiffened. You want me to go back there? You're the only one who can, he said. She won't suspect you, not yet. The thought made my skin crawl. The idea of sitting across from her, pretending not to know the truth. I wasn't sure I could do it. But then I looked at my father, the man who had sacrificed everything, even his name, to protect what little justice he could salvage. I thought about the funeral, about standing alone while everyone whispered, about the chill in my mother's voice as she sipped cocktails in Cancun. I'll do it, I said, steadying my breath. I'll get the files. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Be careful, Claire. If they find out you know, they won't hesitate. A new kind of fire lit in my chest. They should be afraid of me now, I said. The hardest part wasn't walking through the front door of my mother's house. It was pretending not to know. Pretending I hadn't seen my father alive. Pretending I didn't know about the forged documents, the stolen assets, the conspiracy. Pretending I was just a grieving daughter looking for a few sentimental things to cling to. I pressed the doorbell and waited. My reflection stared back at me through the glossy glass panels, tidy hair, soft makeup, a neutral gray sweater. Normal, harmless, but beneath that, a storm. The door opened. Claire, my mother said a little too brightly. What a surprise. She looked exactly the same, elegant, poised, not a single line out of place. There was no grief in her face, just a mild curiosity, like I'd shown up early for a dinner party she'd forgotten she was hosting. Michael appeared behind her, a glass of red wine in hand. Hey there, he said with that casual, smug smile I had always hated. Didn't expect to see you. I forced a smile. I thought maybe I'd come by and pick up a few things, Dad's watch, some photo albums maybe. Oh, honey, Mom said, stepping aside to let me in. Of course, take whatever you like. I know how hard this has been for you. The living room looked the same, immaculate, staged, like no one had ever truly lived there. The fireplace glowed with flickering gas flames and some soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Can I get you a drink? She asked, already drifting toward the bar cart. No, thanks, I said. I won't be long. Michael chuckled as he leaned against the back of the couch. You sure you're not here to make sure we didn't throw out your dad's fishing trophies? I laughed lightly. You know him. He kept everything. I just want a few things that mattered. She gave me a sympathetic nod. We understand. She didn't understand anything. I walked slowly down the hallway toward my father's study. My fingers brushed the familiar wallpaper as I passed, the floral print she insisted on keeping even when the rest of the house was updated. Everything looked the same, smelled the same. But it wasn't the same. Behind me, their laughter floated faintly from the kitchen. Inside the study, I closed the door quietly behind me. The room was just as I remembered it, dark wood shelves lined with books, his leather reading chair in the corner, the desk with perfectly arranged pens and paperweights. A shrine to order. I crossed to the far wall and ran my hands along the paneling, just like my father had described. Second shelf. Left side. Push and slide. It clicked. A narrow panel shifted inward, revealing the false wall. Behind it, a small steel safe embedded in the drywall. Digital lock, nothing flashy. I pulled out the slip of paper from my coat, the combination written in his slanted handwriting. 6 digits, a birthday I'd never forget. The lock blinked green. The safe popped open with a soft click. Inside were stacks of papers, birth certificates, bank records, contracts. The raw truth of a betrayal, organized with ruthless clarity. I grabbed everything, folding the documents into a file folder and sliding them under my coat. My heart was thudding so hard I was sure they'd hear it from the deck. Then I heard footsteps, voices, getting closer. I shut the panel and turned quickly, moving to the bookshelf, pretending to examine a dusty photo of us on a ski trip years ago. The door creaked open. Michael. He raised an eyebrow, sipping his wine. You lose something? He asked casually. I smiled. Just remembering how Dad always hid birthday gifts in this room, thought maybe I'd find something sweet. He didn't move. For a second, we just looked at each other. His gaze slid from my face to the edges of my coat. I kept smiling. Still love this room, smells like him. He sipped again, eyes still locked on mine. Yeah, weird how fast a scent fades though, huh? I gave a short laugh. Not him, he's stubborn even in memory. He didn't smile. I felt the weight of the folder pressing against my ribs beneath the coat. My breathing was too shallow. My hands itched to move, but I couldn't. Not yet. Finally, he gave a half shrug. "Well, don't let us keep you." I nodded and breezed past him, my stomach in knots. "Tell your mom thanks," I called over my shoulder. "I'll text her if I think of anything else I want." Outside, the wind hit me like a slap. I didn't run, not until I reached the car. Once inside, I locked the doors and peeled off down the street, gasping for breath. I had the documents, but now Michael was suspicious. And this wasn't over, not even close. I didn't go straight home. Something in the way Michael looked at me, measured, quiet, too casual, set off alarms I couldn't ignore. I took the long way, weaving through back roads until I was sure no one was following me. Only then did I slip into my apartment, double-lock the door, and close every curtain in the living room. The folder with the stolen documents lay on the table like it was humming. I had done it. I should have felt triumphant, like a spy who'd pulled off a heist. But instead, I felt hollow. Like the weight of what I just touched had shifted something deep inside me, something permanent. I texted my father. "Got the files. Sending pics now." One by one, I snapped photos of the documents, bank transfers, falsified certificates, proof of the offshore accounts, and sent them to the number he'd used to contact me before. I waited and waited. No reply. I stared at the screen, refreshing the message thread. Nothing. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe the signal in the woods was weak. Maybe he was being cautious. But as the minutes passed, something started gnawing at my gut. He wouldn't just go dark. Not now. Still, I tried to stay calm. I got up, made tea, did all the normal things a person should do when they're not spiraling. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sent another message. "Are you there? I need to know you're okay." Still nothing. I replayed our last conversation in my head. His voice when he said they won't hesitate, the way he clutched my hand. Like he knew he was running out of time. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. No ring, no delay, just the automated message like the number no longer existed. I stared down at the phone. "Dad, where did you go?" The room felt too quiet, too still, as if something had shifted the air itself. I turned off the lights, sat on the floor with my back to the wall, and waited for a response that didn't come. By morning, I still hadn't heard from him. The silence rang louder than any alarm. I didn't go to work, didn't eat, just paced the apartment, rereading the documents, cross-checking dates and signatures like there might be a clue I missed. Something that would tell me where he was or what might have happened. But it was all numbers and ink and cold, hard truth. He had trusted me with this. And now he was gone. At noon, I wrote a short message and scheduled it to send to a backup number he'd mentioned once, just in case. "Please call. I'm worried. I need to know you're safe. I don't care about the plan right now. Just please, nothing." I was alone again. And this time it felt deliberate. That night I couldn't sleep. I left every light on, heart racing at every passing car outside the window. My phone never left my hand. By dawn, I was no longer scared. I was angry. He'd asked me to risk everything. To lie, to sneak, to smile at the woman who destroyed him. And I did it, for him. And now, with everything on the line, he had disappeared. Whether he'd been taken or he'd chosen to vanish again didn't matter. He left me behind. Again. The knock came just after 10 a.m., 3 sharp raps on the door, loud, deliberate. I didn't answer right away. Something about the rhythm didn't feel like a neighbor. It felt official, like a warning. I peeked through the peephole. 2 officers stood in the hallway, side by side, their uniforms crisp and unreadable. One had a notepad. The other already had his hand near his holster, not threatening, just ready. I opened the door slowly. "Claire Simmons?" the older one asked. "Yes. We have a warrant for your arrest. Please step outside." The words didn't make sense. They didn't even sound like English at first. "I'm sorry, what?" "Claire Simmons," he repeated calmly. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering and theft of personal property. You need to come with us." I laughed. I actually laughed. "This is a mistake. You don't understand. My mother is lying. She's the one." "You can explain everything at the station," the younger officer said, already moving to cuff me. "You don't understand," I said again, panic blooming like fire in my chest. "The house is my father's. She stole his documents. She's covering for—" "Ma'am, stop resisting." I froze as the cold metal tightened around my wrists. They read me my rights, took my phone, walked me past my neighbors like I was some criminal off the nightly news. I wanted to scream, to claw my way back into the apartment and throw the documents in their faces. Look at the truth, but they didn't care. Not yet. At the station, they processed me like I was just another name on a form. Fingerprints. Mugshot. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked if the charges made sense. Finally, they brought me into an interrogation room, just me and a metal table. And then she walked in. My mother, dressed in pale gray slacks and a pearl sweater like she was heading to a brunch, not accusing her daughter of a felony. She looked at me, eyes glassy with fake emotion. "I can't believe my own daughter would do this to me," she said softly to the officer behind her. "I thought she was grieving. I had no idea she'd come into our home and steal from me." I stared at her. "You're unbelievable," I whispered. "She told us she wanted some keepsakes," my mother said, dabbing her eye with a tissue. "And then we found the safe open, important documents missing. Her voice caught. "I feel so betrayed." She turned toward me, eyes suddenly sharp. "Why, Claire? Why would you do this? What would your father think?" My voice broke. "He'd be disgusted if he were alive." The moment I said it, I saw it flash across her face. Not surprise, not grief, just calculation. She already knew he was alive. And now she knew that I knew too. The officer beside her didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He just wrote something down and said, "We'll continue this shortly." They left me alone in the room, handcuffed to the chair. I stared at the wall and tried to breathe. This was it, her trap. I had walked straight into it. And now my father was silent, gone without explanation, while I was the one being punished for trying to help. When they came back with the official charge sheet, I signed it with trembling hands. No one believed me. No one was coming to save me. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure I could save myself either. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, but in tone. In judgment. In how every eye seemed to slide over me with a silent verdict before the judge ever spoke. The air was thick with whispers and the click of pens. My public defender sat beside me, a woman named Sandra who had kind eyes and not enough time. She had been assigned the night before. I could tell she was doing her best, but this wasn't just another case to me. It was my life. "You understand the charges," she whispered. "Yes," I replied. "You're pleading not guilty." I nodded. "Absolutely not guilty." "Good, just stick to the truth. We'll argue for leniency if needed, but—" "There's nothing to be lenient about," I snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry, I know you're trying." She gave me a small nod. The bailiff called everyone to rise, and then she walked in. My mother, Diane Simmons, in a structured navy dress and heels sharp enough to cut glass. She sat just behind the prosecutor, delicately dabbing her eyes with a tissue like this was a funeral. She's playing the part well, I thought bitterly. Michael wasn't with her. Of course he wasn't. He wouldn't risk being seen. He never dirtied his own hands. The judge entered, his robe billowing like a curtain of finality. I barely heard the opening remarks. Something about intent. About theft of private property, about violating trust within a family. It was surreal, like watching someone else's life spiral while being stuck inside their body. When it was my turn to speak, Sandra rose with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, my client has no prior offenses, no criminal history. She has a full-time job, a stable residence. The items in question, documents, primarily were owned by her deceased father. My client believes these were wrongfully withheld from her." The judge looked down at me. "Miss Simmons, did you or did you not enter your mother's home without explicit permission to access these materials?" I swallowed. "She invited me in. I said I was looking for mementos. That wasn't a lie. But I knew what I was looking for. I knew they were hiding something, and I had to prove it." The judge raised a brow. "They, meaning your mother?" "My mother and her partner, Michael Renner," I said clearly. "They faked my father's death and stole everything he owned." A ripple of confusion swept the courtroom. Even Sandra shifted in her seat. The judge looked unconvinced. "And your evidence for this?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open. Everyone turned. Two men entered. FBI agents. I recognized the jackets instantly. The older one stepped forward and said, loud and clear, "Your Honor, we need to address this court immediately." Everything froze. The judge blinked. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Miller, Bureau of Investigation," the man said, producing a badge. We have a warrant for the arrest of Diane Simmons on charges of conspiracy, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping. My mother stood slowly, her face pale, her lips parting like she couldn't breathe. "This is absurd," she started, but the second agent had already produced handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, reciting the Miranda rights as she stammered in disbelief. And then, from the hallway, another figure stepped in. My father, alive, undeniably alive. The courtroom tipped sideways. I stood, tears already spilling over. "Dad," he nodded once, eyes red. "I'm sorry I was late." I ran into his arms as the courtroom turned into chaos behind us. He was real. He was here, and justice finally had arrived. A month later, we sat side by side on the porch of my father's rented cottage just outside Asheville. The morning air still carried the crisp edge of early spring, but the sun was rising without apology. Bold, clean, honest. I cradled a mug of coffee between my hands, letting the warmth sink into my skin. He sat next to me in silence, his cane resting against the railing, a blanket across his knees, and a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo flipped open beside him. "I still don't believe they let her out on bail," I muttered. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice low but steady. "The evidence speaks louder than her crocodile tears ever could." I nodded, taking a slow sip. After the courtroom exploded, after the cameras, the headlines, the moment my mother was led out in cuffs while shouting about family betrayal, I thought I'd feel something bigger, some grand sense of victory. But what I felt was simpler, peace. The kind that doesn't come in one crashing wave but trickles in slowly like the quiet after rain. "I almost didn't forgive you," I said suddenly. My father turned toward me, startled. "I mean it," I continued, staring out at the trees. "You let me think you were dead. You let me grieve you, and you watched it happen." He nodded slowly. "I know. You watched me bury you, Dad. You let me fall apart alone." He didn't say anything for a long time. The wind rustled through the leaves. A bird chirped nearby, oblivious. "I told myself it was the only way," he said finally. "That if I stayed gone long enough, Diane would get comfortable, that she'd make a mistake. I thought I was protecting you. But I wasn't a child," I said. "I was your daughter, and I deserved the truth." He exhaled. "You're right. It wasn't a defense, it wasn't an excuse, it was true. I'm still angry," I admitted. "Good," he said, "because it means you care." I looked at him, really looked at him. His hair was grayer, his hands shakier, but the way he met my gaze, that was the man who raised me, who built shelves for my books in every apartment I ever had, who made waffles every Saturday until Mom said carbs were low class. "You saved everything," he said softly, "even when I didn't believe you would." I smirked just a little. "You're lucky I'm stubborn." "You get that from your mother," he said dryly. I laughed. It felt good to laugh again. We sat there for a while longer, watching the day unfold like a page turning, no rush, no threats, just air and sky and the soft clink of ceramic mugs. Eventually I asked, "What will you do now?" He smiled faintly. "Write. A book," he nodded. "Not a tell-all, just the truth. What happened, how easy it is to lose everything when you trust the wrong person." I turned toward him. "You should call it Buried Twice." His eyes lit with amusement. "Too dramatic. Coming from the man who faked his death to expose his wife's secret criminal empire." He chuckled. "Touché." And then, as the sun climbed higher and the shadows retreated, I felt something I hadn't in months. Safe. 2 years later, I stood in front of a modest crowd at the Hilton Ballroom downtown. A soft murmur filled the room, audience members shifting in their chairs, sipping coffee, adjusting name tags. Behind me, a banner read, "Voices Reclaimed, National Conference for Financial Survivors and Identity Protection." And beneath it, in smaller print, "Hosted by Claire Simmons, founder of Reclaim Secure." I took a breath, then another. "I used to think justice looked like prison bars," I began. "Handcuffs, a courtroom, a gavel slamming down, but that's not really justice. That's consequence." The room quieted. "Justice," I said slowly, "is getting your voice back after someone tried to steal it." I paused, eyes scanning the faces. Women in their 30s and 60s. A few men, survivors, whistleblowers, former victims who once sat in rooms just like this one, wondering if they'd ever be believed. "My name is Claire Simmons. 2 years ago, I was arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I was charged with theft, treated like a criminal, and paraded through the system while the people who actually stole millions lived in luxury. A ripple moved through the crowd. My own mother orchestrated the crime. My own mother tried to erase my father's life and mine for money. I let the words hang. It never got easier to say them, but I said them anyway. She underestimated me, I continued. So did everyone else. They thought I'd stay quiet, that I'd collapse under the pressure. But I didn't. I dug, I exposed, and I testified. And when my mother was convicted, it wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for every person who's ever been betrayed by the people they loved. I glanced to the side of the stage. My father sat in the front row, gray cardigan over a blue-collared shirt, notebook in his lap. He gave me a subtle nod, nothing dramatic, just enough. And that's why I started Reclaim Secure, I said, lifting my voice. Because identity theft doesn't always come from hackers overseas. Sometimes it comes from across the dinner table, from people who smile at you while they drain your life. I walked across the stage, more sure of each step now. We help victims navigate the system, reclaim stolen accounts, freeze fraudulent assets, but more than anything, we help them speak. The applause was steady, not thunderous, just real. After the panel, a young woman approached me. Late 20s, red hair pulled into a nervous ponytail. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. I've been following your story since the trial. My ex did something similar. Not as bad, but it wrecked me. I smiled gently. Bad enough to bring you here. She nodded. It's been hard, but hearing you talk about getting your voice back, it helped. That's how it starts, I said. One word, then another. She hesitated. Do you ever wish it hadn't happened, like, that you'd never found out? The question caught me off guard. For a moment I thought of that night, standing in the cemetery, fingers frozen around a piece of paper that changed everything. Then I thought of now, of this. No, I said. I wish it hadn't needed to happen, but I'm grateful that it did, because now I get to help people like you. Her eyes shimmered. She nodded and walked away. I turned back toward the stage, gathering my notes. From behind me, my father's voice called out, soft but steady. You were always meant to lead. I smiled at him. Took me long enough to believe it. As we walked out into the cool afternoon, I looked up at the sky, clear, wide open. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's secrets. I was carrying mine with pride. Justice wasn't revenge. It was waking up every day and knowing I survived. And I'm still speaking. The thing about betrayal is it echoes. Not loudly, not all at once, but in subtle, unexpected moments. Like standing in line at the grocery store and seeing your mother's favorite brand of red wine, or hearing a stranger laugh just like her and turning too quickly. It's been 5 months since the sentencing. 5 months since I stood in that courtroom and watched Diane Simmons, my mother, be led away in handcuffs after pleading guilty to 3 federal charges. The final sentence, 11 years. No parole for the first 5. Her assets seized. Her reputation erased. Michael took a deal, testified, spent a few weeks in federal holding before being relocated to some pale version of witness protection. Cowards always seem to slither out of the mess they make. And me, I've tried not to let her live in my head anymore. But last week, I opened a drawer in my apartment and found something I hadn't touched in years. An old stationery box with her handwriting on the inside flap. For Claire, on the days words feel safer than talking. She gave it to me when I was 15. The irony isn't lost on me. So today, for no real reason, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote her a letter I'll never send. Dear Mom, you used to say that love was a kind of insurance, something you invest in, hoping it pays out when things go wrong. But I think what you meant was control, because you never loved me in the way I needed. Not openly, not unconditionally. You gave praise like currency and affection like a contract. One mistake, one deviation from your blueprint, and I was a liability, but still I mourned you. That's the part I need you to understand. When I thought you'd lost Dad, I mourned for you. I cried for the version of you I imagined, widowed, heartbroken, lost. I wanted to call and offer comfort. I nearly flew to Cancun just to hold your hand through the grief I assumed you were burying under beach towels and piña coladas. But you were never mourning. You were celebrating, and I will never fully forget that. But here's what I will do. I will forgive. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I deserve a mind that doesn't flinch every time I think of you. A heart that doesn't ache when it sees a mother and daughter in a coffee shop. I deserve freedom. And forgiveness is the only key I have. So I'm unlocking the last door and walking through it alone, yes, but not empty. You don't get to define me anymore. Not as your daughter. Not as your mistake. Not as your pawn. I'm Claire Simmons. And I am not afraid of the past anymore. See, I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of the stationery box. Not to send. Not to destroy. Just to mark the moment. Later that evening, my father came by with takeout from the Thai place we both liked, extra spicy, too much basil, just the way he used to sneak it past my mom when she was in one of her cleansing moods. He noticed the open stationery box. "You writing again?" he asked. "Kind of," I said, curling up on the couch. "More like releasing." He gave me a small smile. "That's writing, too." We ate in silence for a bit, comfortable, familiar. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You know, I used to wonder if you'd ever forgive her, even after everything." I looked at him. "Do you think I should?" "I think forgiveness isn't a favor," he said, setting down his chopsticks. "It's a boundary, a way to say you don't get to keep hurting me, not even in my memories." I nodded slowly. He didn't ask what I'd written. He didn't need to, and I didn't need to explain. The ghosts were quiet tonight. The scars still tingled. The memory still flickered. But the weight of betrayal, it no longer lived in me.